Indian serial killer. His childhood was the beginning of everything, where what happened to him at the beginning was not easy. But as the days passed, he took his right and forgot that he was taking his right from children who were once in their place. He killed more than 250 girls and became the most famous killer in history. And yet, he is still out of prison to this day. He goes here and no one knows where he is or what he is doing. But did the police really not catch him? Not once. And what happened to him to kill all this? And who is he in the first place? Pedro Lopes was born on 8 October 1948 in the city of Colombia in Colombia, and was the seventh son where he had 12 brothers, and his father, Midar Torres, was a member of the Colombian Conservatives Party during the period of the Civil War in Colombia and was assassinated before Pedro was born. But his mother was a prostitute and always treated him harshly and kicked him out of the house because of caressing his sister when he was 9 years old. Then Pedro's actual life began by meeting a man of kindness. He offered him food and the night with him at his house instead of staying in the street, and he agreed and went with him. But the man's purpose was different, where he robbed Pedro and kicked him out of the house, and again Pedro became on the street, and in this case until he reached 12 years old and entered the orphanage until he was 18 years old and went out and began to learn to steal cars and sell them in order to get food. But it was not long before he went to prison again for stealing cars, and here was the beginning of Pedro Lopes' crimes. Pedro was imprisoned for 7 years, and during these years he was robbed again by the prisoners. But here he decided not to remain silent and kill those who did it. And he was not tried because of his statements, which are self-defense, but the trial decided to add 2 years to his prison term. Pedro got out of prison in 1978, while he was 30 years old, and began his series of revenge against young girls, where all his victims were from the age of 9 to 12 years, and he went to the city of Piro. It didn't take long until the percentage of girls disappeared and families began to worry, while Pedro reached the murder and rape of 100 girls and then buried them in mass graves. And didn't rest until he was caught by the American Indians and was tortured and buried in the sand to the head and covered with honey so that the ants could eat from him, and they wanted to kill him slowly, but an American man intervened and wanted to take him to the authorities, and he was already handed over and went to prison but got out quickly. Pedro didn't calm down even after his release from prison and moved to Ecuador complete the rest of the crimes in the same way without any change in the method of killing, and the situation became more difficult with him as he was in 1 week killing 3 girls and then burying the body in one of the mass graves located in the city. At this time, the company thought that the disappearance of the girls as a result of illegal immigration or kidnapped by street vendors to trade in slaves or something else, but it never occurred to them that there was a serial killer among them. Pedro remained careful not to be discovered. However, Pedro began to fall, and the reason was the floods, where in April 1980, Ecuador had torrents that almost reached the point of flooding, and because of them revealed the bodies that he was burying in the cemeteries. But the number of bodies was a shock for the police and the people of Ecuador. 53 bodies of young girls were raped by Pedro, but at the time no one knew what it was Pedro. However, Pedro continued to do what he was doing until he fell completely into the hands of the police. Pedro was arrested in the same year when he tried to rob a girl named Mari from popular markets, and traders began to surround him until the police came and arrested him on the basis of kidnapping one girl. But when the interrogations began with him, it was different at that time. as Pedro confessed to everything easily from the beginning, from the robbery of girls and their murder in Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. And he began to recount what he was doing in detail, from stealing 300 children from popular markets and taking them to bring them candy and luring them into the trap and go with him where he commented here saying, "They never scream, they expect nothing, they are innocent." And then he begins to count the child and begins torturing her and robbing her at night. And with the beginning of the day, he killed them where he commented saying in the interrogations, "I put my hand around her throat when the sun rises. It was only good if I could see her eyes. I didn't kill anyone at night. It would have been a waste in the dark. I had to see them in the light of day. There was a divine pleasure when I put my hand around the girls' necks and saw the light coming out of their eyes." And after interrogations, he went with the police to where he was burying the rest of his victims. And he said at the time that he used to go to the cemeteries where the victims were and talk to them. And in the end, he left and did a new crime. And the police discovered 81 new bodies that the floods had not uncovered, and transferred him to the court so that he could receive his punishment. The court sentenced Pedro to 2 years of solitary confinement. The court sentenced Pedro to solitary confinement for 20 years, and during his imprisonment, it gives him press interviews, and in one of them he was smiling and said that he didn't regret and would kill more girls when he got out of prison. And in 1990, after 10 years of imprisonment, the authorities took him to the Colombia border and released him for good behavior. Pedro appeared again on 31 August 1994. But he was an illegal immigrant and was handed over to the authorities and sentenced to prison. But after a while they thought he was crazy, so they transferred him to the psychiatric ward of the hospital Bogota. And in 1998 he was declared sane and was released on bail $50 under certain conditions. Pedro disappeared from sight and in 2002 appeared once another in a murder case, and he was extradited to Interpol. But he went out again and disappeared, and no one knows anything about him to this day, whether he is alive or a lifeless corpse.